All right, let's just jump right into this explainer. We're going to see how a century's worth of what sounds like super dry academic management theory is actually the ultimate operational playbook for building a modern enterprise. It's really cool. We're looking at a fascinating case study that proves how understanding history, human behavior, and value creation can literally insulate a company from global economic turmoil. Now, what is truly staggering here is the sheer scale. We're talking about Science Applications International Corporation, or SAIC. By 2009, they hit an unbelievable $10 billion in revenue. $10 billion. And that was fueled by the minds of 45,000 employees. To put that into perspective, this absolutely wasn't a fluke. It was the result of a meticulously crafted environment that was custom designed to maximize human potential.
So, how did they do it? Well, it all started with their founder, Dr. J. Robert Beister. He realized pretty early on that to recruit top-tier scientists and engineers away from these super-secure government jobs, he had to offer something completely unprecedented. So, he anchored his business in shared equity. He knew he needed to build a culture rooted in a simple but powerful idea. Those who actually contribute to the company should literally own it.
Okay, here's our roadmap to reverse engineer their success today. We'll start with the SAIC success story, move through the 5 eras of management, look at Theory X versus Theory Y, check out how they adapted to global forces, explore value-driven management, and wrap up with some actionable advice.
Let's kick things off with Section 1, the SAIC's success story, and how they built their foundation.
The absolutely crucial piece of the puzzle here is the Employee Stock Ownership Program, or ESOP for short. This was the beating heart of SAIC's whole strategy. By making the workers the actual owners, Dr. Beister solved that universal corporate headache of employee retention. I mean, when your workforce is filled with brilliant scientists, you really can't just offer them a standard paycheck. True ownership brings this deep sense of responsibility and a really genuine concern for the long-term welfare of the organization. It's a real game changer.
Author Jeff Gates actually hit the nail on the head regarding why this matters so much. He pointed out that without this kind of broadened ownership, companies risk becoming completely disconnected from the very people doing the work inside them. Think about it. When outside investors are the only ones holding the equity, a company can easily lose its internal conscience. SAIC, they completely bypass that trap.
Moving right along to Section 2, the 5 eras of management and their operational strategies.
So, what we're looking at here is over 100 years of academic theory, kind of compressed into a single, easy-to-digest timeline. We went all the way from the strict, stopwatch-driven task measurement of the 1890s scientific management era right through to the 1960s. And that's where we finally started to understand the organization as a living, breathing part of its broader environment.
Now, SAICA didn't just pick one of these eras and stick to it. Instead, they built a sort of conglomerate theory. They pulled really heavily from Henri Fayol's early 1900s principles, focusing a ton on concepts of equity, treating all employees fairly, as well as keeping order and ensuring proper personnel remuneration. Basically, they built this highly adaptive modern structure just by cherry-picking the absolute best parts of historical theory.
This brings us to Section 3, Theory X versus Theory Y, examining the behavioral crossroads.
There's a really stark contrast between these two mindsets. Theory X is that old school, the beatings will continue until morale improves kind of mentality. It basically assumes that workers are inherently lazy. Well, SAIC fiercely rejected that. No way. Instead, they fully embraced Theory Y. They operated on the assumption that their scientists and engineers intrinsically wanted to do a great job. In their eyes, the manager's job wasn't to micromanage or control them, but simply to provide the resources they needed to invent and succeed. Because they completely trusted in Theory Y, SAIC started out by deploying a highly organic, decentralized structure. So rather than your typical top-down, mechanistic hierarchy, they acted almost like a loose federation of little entrepreneurial units. They actually empowered their employees to act like their own small business owners, right there within the larger corporate umbrella. This super flattened hierarchy meant that decisions could be made incredibly fast, directly by the people actually doing the work. Let's look at Section 4 now, adapting to global forces through contingency theory. Honestly, the numbers here tell a story of absolute resilience. Just look at that revenue jump from 2003 to 2009. We're talking about going from under $5 billion to over $10 billion. Even navigating through massive global economic turmoil, SAIC literally doubled its revenue. So, how exactly do you manage that kind of explosive growth in such a chaotic environment?
Well, right around 2004, facing some pretty massive economic and political shifts, SAIC leaned hard into contingency theory. Basically, this theory says there's no single perfect way to organize a business. It depends entirely on what's happening in your external environment. So SAIC pivoted. They shifted away from their purely organic roots and moved toward a slightly more centralized mechanistic structure. They recognized that, hey, as a multi-billion-dollar contractor dealing with massive government agencies, they needed just a bit more hierarchical order to survive and really thrive.
Moving to Section 5, value-driven management, which is really the core engine of everything they did.
Value-driven management is built on a really straightforward premise. What people value is what drives their actions. SAIC weighed literally every single organizational decision against specific value drivers, looking at everything from the external culture all the way down to the individual employee. And the real magic here? It happens because their ESOP perfectly syncs up individual employee values with the owner's values. I mean, think about it. When the employee is the owner, creating value for the customer directly enriches the worker. It's a win-win.
And this kind of extreme agility was just baked right into their DNA. As Dr. Beister himself noted, their strategy was incredibly malleable. They tried out a ton of different innovations. But here's the kicker. If a management technique or a structural change ended up destroying value rather than infusing it, they just threw it out immediately, scrapped it, and tried another approach. They absolutely never let their ego get in the way of creating value.
Finally, let's wrap up with Section 6, actionable advice for modern managers.
Look, you definitely don't need to be a $10 billion government contractor to use this playbook. You can completely replicate this success on a local level. Step 1. Start treating your team members like entrepreneurs. Give them real autonomy and an actual stake in the rewards. Step 2. You've got to prioritize real, constructive feedback. Communication has to flow upward to leadership just as easily as it flows downward to the team. And Step 3. Remain adaptable. Try to build a high-integrity team environment where leaders are actually showing their commitment through their actions, not just their words.
So, I'm going to leave you with this somewhat provocative thought to ponder today. When you look at your own organization, especially in our rapidly changing, super competitive economy, are you managing your people simply to control them, or are you managing them to actually create value? Because as we've seen, the difference between those two approaches is literally the difference between stagnation and a $10 billion success story.